But now let's move on to our second question of the week. And it's, how would you rate the new World Cup format? I think it's a pretty runaway poll. I don't know if this is the most runaway, but I'll let you talk about it after you say how you would rate it.
Yeah, our listeners are almost unanimously in agreement that it is a thumbs up for the new format for the World Cup. 95% of you at the moment with a thumbs up, 5% of you with a thumbs down, and a few of our listeners getting in touch with their thoughts. Thomas John Dockerell saying much better. The cream still rises to the top. However, the tournament was much more open than previous years. Andrew Griffiths, he says, great format, but extend to 48 teams and have everyone playing groups to earn their place in the knockouts. Craig Brown, stick with just doubles, but make the seeds start in the group stage as well. He's agreeing with Andrew there. And last one, Theo, amazing, best World Cup ever. Obviously missed the first one in 2010, but it was a huge revamp for the World Cup. I think the three key changes, and I'll go through them all individually, they were all pairs, group stage, and more teams. We had 8 more teams up to 40, and starting with the all pairs, I've got to say I loved it. And yes, we did have that longer format because of it, because there was one game instead of 2 or 3. There were 1 or 2 more one-sided games. You had the Scotland whitewash against France. You had the final 10-2 in the end to Wales. But I think you are going to get the odd game like that in that longer format. You get it in any tournament. The World Match Play, you'll see a 10-2 or a 10-3. But on the flip side, you are going to see some thrillers. You are going to see these games go real deep. And we saw a lot of thrillers at the weekend, like the 3 games involving Belgium. And I think that's when you weigh it up, you take that all day long. You are going to take the odd one-sided game if you are going to get those thrillers where you get a lot more drama than you would in a best of 7 played 3 times. And I think having all the players up there as well just made the World Cup that more unique. It does really stand out. Now, when people say the World Cup, it will be, oh, that's the pairs tournament, isn't it? And for me, that's a really good USP for this tournament going forward. It's going to build more interest because it's not something you see very often on TV. You are now guaranteed to see the pairs, whereas the old format, as we've said before, you could go whole sessions without seeing a pairs game. I think the group stage is a format. I'll come on to the increased number of teams in a moment, but having 3 teams in a group and the way they set it out, so the losing team from the first night played the next session, I think that meant every game in that last round of group games had something riding on it. And okay, there was some with less riding on it than others. There were some teams going into that last game, they needed maybe 1 leg or 2 legs to go through, whereas the majority of the group games at the end, it was winner takes all. Winner went into the knockout stage, the loser went home. So I like the way they set that up with the groups. And I think other events, we see a group stage, the Grand Slam, that's 4 players in a group. You do sometimes get a lot of dead rubbers towards the end, but we didn't get that here. And I think the only gripes that I was seeing on social media, and that some people were saying with this revamped World Cup, is 40 teams too much? Is there enough strength in depth in darts at this level to have 40 teams in the tournament yet? And you mentioned him a moment ago, that the Bahrain player averaging 36 and 39. Not a good look for the event, but on the flip side, and it was crazy to see this stat afterwards, you had that player averaging 36, his partner Basim Mahmood averaging 99. Have we unearthed a hidden gem there in Basim Mahmood? So it's tough. You want players and countries to get these opportunities, and travelling all those miles, just going from playing in your home country to then the bright lights of the stage, the big crowd, that's a huge difference, and it can take some getting used to play at your best level. But I think there probably needs to be more qualifiers introduced. Maybe with Bahrain in particular, you hold a qualifier in that area with Cyprus, Turkey, Egypt, UAE, teams like that. And the other sticking point, just lastly, the protection for the top 4 seeds, getting a bye to the last 16. I think if the PDC keep this current format, which I like, then one day I think you've got to expand it to 48 teams, have 16 groups of 3. You throw those top 4 seeds in with everyone else at the start. But I think at the moment, as it's 40 teams, I think you've got to keep it as it is. I don't think there's too much you can change. And overall, it's been a great tournament. The changes, they've worked well.
I'm in complete agreement. Even, I think that's a good point that you made, or at least I guess you won't say that you made it, but you attribute it to other people, that is there enough depth to sustain 40 competitive teams? I think there's an argument that there weren't 40 competitive teams this weekend, but most of them were pretty close. Even some of the teams that weren't fully up to snuff were competitive in at least one match. Thailand, returning after a decade out, they took Croatia to a last leg decider in their second match. India won 2 legs on Canada. Bahrain won 2 legs on Latvia, who topped the group. Those are, 3 of the probably 5 worst teams in this competition. I didn't mention Iceland, and they won 2 legs in both of their matches as well. Yes, those teams weren't up to par. Those teams did struggle, but they weren't that far adrift. The only ones that really were adrift were Ukraine, who didn't win a leg, although they still averaged 74 nearly in their second match, and Guyana, who averaged south of 70 in both their matches. So I think you could say that there were 38 teams that were competitive at the World Cup. Maybe there were, of those 38, a good half dozen or so were a cut below, but they were competitive. And if they're competitive, then what's really the problem? Look, the FIFA World Cup, well, it's going to 48 teams now. It's been 32, but there's usually 1 or 2 teams in that 32 that aren't competitive even at the World Cup in a sport that has tens of thousands of world-class players because it's played all over the world, and it has so much money in it that it encourages people to start playing from the age of 4. So if the FIFA World Cup is not going to have every single team at their World Cup really be competitive, even though most of them are, I don't see the problem that you have a couple that aren't competitive, but you're adding representation. And you know what? Guyana earned their right to be there. They won through a qualifier against a Brazilian team that might not be the best team in the world, but has proven itself at least a competitive team in the past. So I just don't see that as being a problem. I think 40 is probably the number it should stay at for some time. I think the ideal eventually would be to get it up to 48, because that way all 16 seeds will have to play from the start, and you could have 16 groups of 3 as opposed to just 12 and giving 4 byes. But I think what this proved is that we're not quite there quite yet. I think we'll be there in the future. There are countries that have been in the World Cup in the past and have players capable of representing them that aren't there this year. Greece is not there. Slovenia and Slovakia aren't there, even though they have been there in the past. Malaysia's been there in the past. And we know the Asian tour is now back up and running, and I think we'll probably start to see some Malaysian players or players from other places in Asia that show that maybe there's more countries that can represent in the future. We're not there yet, but I think that's coming in the future. And I think the 40 worked. I always thought the doubles play throughout would work, the pairs play throughout. I think that was just something that makes this tournament different. Obviously, representing your country makes it different. But beyond that, when it was mostly singles play, other than what shirt Dave Chisnell was wearing, it was seemingly like every other tournament on the calendar. It's not anymore. And the pairs play works, and it makes this event so much more what it should be, which is a team event. I don't really have any complaints. I think this is the format it should be. I think it worked. I think it worked fantastically. It made it the most entertaining and the most intriguing World Cup in quite some time. I think there's ways to improve in the long run by increasing the number of countries, maybe even moving this out to be a full week event if the calendar allows it. That way you can have some longer matches, or you can have 4 teams in each group or something, so that you're getting more matches, getting more time on television. But again, that's something for the future. It's not there yet. Where the game is right now, this is the perfect event, and they did it exactly right. I agree with almost all of our listeners, the 95% who approved of this format. And I usually am someone to at least find something to critique. There's really nothing. This was exactly what it should have been.